Duck's voice.
Man, imagine a sound so futuristic it felt like it came from another planet. A voice that wasn't just sung, but bent, twisted, and electrified through a talkbox. Before swipes, before online dating, Roger Troutman gave us computer love. He painted a vision of romance through wires and melodies when the rest of the world was still flipping cassette tapes. That's crazy, right? He had the whole block bouncing with more bounce to the ounce, broke hearts with I Wanna Be Your Man, and then took hip-hop to the stratosphere with Tupac on California Love. But here's the wild part. Despite changing the entire game, Roger Troutman's name doesn't get mentioned like it should. So what really happened to him? And why is his story still underrated? Let's get into his story right now. Let me know where you're watching this from in the comments. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of water or tea, sit back, and let's start this journey together. Roger Troutman was born in Dayton, Ohio in 1951, right in the heart of a city that would later become a funk capital. Man, Dayton was buzzing with energy back then. The steel mills, the churches, the tight-knit neighborhoods, it all gave kids like Roger a mix of grit and soul. And Roger, he wasn't just any kid. He grew up in a big family, one of 9 siblings, and that house was never quiet. Music, laughter, arguments, it was life happening at full volume, you know? Roger's family didn't have much. Times were tough, money was tight, and the Troutmans knew the struggle firsthand. But sometimes, man, it's out of those hard places that the brightest sparks show up. And for Roger, that spark was music. By the time he was little, he already had an ear for sound. While other kids were out running the block, Roger was fooling around with instruments, making noise that didn't sound like noise at all. It sounded like the start of something new. Church played a big role too. Like so many black families in the Midwest, the Troutmans leaned on gospel, leaned on faith, leaned on community. The music he heard on Sundays stuck to him, those harmonies, those voices lifting higher than the troubles outside. Roger soaked it all in. He wasn't just listening, he was learning. And the world around him? Man, let's be real, it wasn't easy for a young black boy in Ohio in the 1950s. Racism, segregation, and limited opportunities were still weighing heavy. But instead of letting that cage him in, Roger turned it into fuel. He saw music as a way out, a way forward, and a way to make people feel something. Imagine this young kid, sitting in his room, banging on anything he could find, dreaming big, even when the world outside was telling him to stay small. That was Roger Troutman, a visionary in the making. As Roger grew older, that curiosity for sound only got stronger. Man, the kid could pick up almost anything and make music out of it. By the time he was a teenager, Roger had already taught himself how to play guitar, drums, keyboards, you name it. That's wild, right? He didn't wait for some fancy music school. He just learned by ear, by passion, by grinding day after day until it clicked. But what really set him apart was the way he heard music. He didn't just play it, he imagined new shapes for it. Dayton was already brewing with funk energy, with groups like the Ohio Players laying down heavy grooves, but Roger was on his own wavelength. He wanted something futuristic, something that sounded like the future knocking on your door. It was during these years that he started experimenting with that famous talkbox sound. Now, it wasn't brand new, the device had been around, but Roger, he mastered it, bent it, and turned it into his own voice. He was out here making the instrument sing, cry, even flirt, man. It was like the machine had feelings, and Roger knew how to bring them out. At the same time, his family became his band. Roger and his brothers Larry, Lester, Terry. They weren't just siblings, they were a unit. They'd play in basements, garages, anywhere somebody would listen. That chemistry was special because it wasn't forced. It was family. You could hear that connection in every jam session. People in Dayton started to notice. You'd hear about these Troutman boys tearing up local talent shows, hitting small clubs, turning heads with their raw energy. Folks would say, "Man, those kids sound different. That's something special." And they were right. By the late 1960s, Roger was already carving his lane. He had the vision, the sound, and the hustle. What he didn't have yet was the stage big enough to hold him, but it was coming. The basement sessions, the neighborhood shows, the endless nights of practice, they were all building blocks for what was about to explode. Roger Troutman wasn't just another kid with a dream. He was a blueprint in progress, getting ready to flip the whole music world upside down. By the early 1970s, Roger Troutman was no longer just that talented kid from Dayton. He was becoming the centerpiece of something bigger. Man, you could feel it in the air. The Troutman brothers had formed their own group, first called Roger and the Human Body, and they were out here hustling from club to club, laying down grooves that nobody could ignore. You know how some bands sound rough in the beginning? Not these cats. They had chemistry, they had rhythm, and they had Roger steering the whole ship. The turning point came when Roger caught the ear of none other than Bootsy Collins and the P-Funk family. That's crazy, right? Bootsy, already a legend in his own right, heard what Roger was doing and was like, "Yeah, the world needs this." George Clinton also saw the potential. And once you got P-Funk co-signing you, man, you're in the door of something major. That connection led to a deal with Warner Brothers in 1979, and boom, the name Zapp was born. The band, made up mostly of Roger and his brothers, was ready to shake things up, and shake it up they did. Their debut album dropped in 1980, and right there on that record was a track that would set the tone for everything. More Bounce to the Ounce. Man, let's stop for a second. More Bounce to the Ounce wasn't just a song, it was a movement. The bass was heavy, the rhythm hypnotic, and Roger's talkbox turned the whole thing into outer space funk. When that joint hit the clubs, when it hit the block parties, it was over. People couldn't sit still. West Coast DJs, East Coast DJs, everybody had that record on repeat. It wasn't just Dayton anymore, Roger had the whole country bouncing. The success of that track turned Zapp into one of the hottest new funk bands of the early 1980s. Roger had officially arrived. And the thing is, he wasn't chasing trends. He was setting them. Nobody sounded like him, and everybody knew it. But here's the thing about Roger Troutman, he never made it just about himself. Even though he was the mastermind, he always pulled his family with him. Larry handled business, Lester was on drums, Terry on percussion. It was a family affair. That unity made the sound even stronger, and it made Zapp more than a band. It was a statement. From basement sessions in Dayton to a nationwide hit, Roger had taken the first step toward rewriting funk history. And man, this was just the beginning. After More Bounce to the Ounce blew up, Roger Troutman and Zapp weren't just the talk of Dayton anymore, they were on everybody's radar. Man, that record became an anthem. But here's the thing. Roger wasn't about to be a one-hit wonder. He had too much vision, too much fire in him. Through the early 1980s, Zapp dropped album after album, and each one had a groove that stuck. Songs like Dance Floor and Be All Right had people two-stepping all night. And it wasn't just funkheads, soul fans, R&B lovers, even the hip-hop community started peeping what Roger was doing. DJs loved his records because they had that bounce, that raw rhythm you could flip into something new. Roger himself became the star. With that talkbox strapped up, he turned concerts into experiences. He'd walk out on stage, hit one note through the tube, and the crowd would go crazy. Nobody had ever seen anything like it. It wasn't just music, it was theater. It was performance. It was Roger bending sound like a magician. And man, he wasn't just killing it live. In the studio, Roger was a mad scientist. He wrote, produced, arranged, he could do it all. People in the industry started coming to him for that special flavor only he could bring. You wanted your record to stand out? You called Roger Troutman. By the mid-1980s, his reputation was untouchable. Zapp had stacked platinum records, and Roger was steadily carving his lane as not just a funk artist, but a visionary producer. The way he blended gospel roots, street funk, and futuristic sounds gave his music this timeless feel. You could drop it in a club in 1982, and guess what? It still hits the same in 1992, and even today. But let's be real, while Roger was climbing, he wasn't getting the same recognition as some of his peers. Acts like Prince or Rick James were dominating headlines, while Roger, who was innovating just as much, wasn't put in that same spotlight. That's crazy, man. Underrated from the jump. Still, Roger wasn't chasing clout. He was chasing sound. And little did the world know, he was just one step away from making songs that would not only dominate the charts, but rewrite the definition of funk, soul, and R&B forever. By the time the mid-1980s rolled around, Roger Troutman was no longer just the funky kid from Dayton, he was a star in his own right. Zapp had already made waves, but Roger was ready to carve his own path as a solo artist. And man, when he did, it was like opening the door to the future. In 1985, Roger dropped a track that would go down as one of the most unique love songs ever written, Computer Love. Now, let's pause here for a second. This was 1985, long before people were swiping right, long before chat rooms, long before dating apps. And here's Roger, singing about finding love through technology. That's wild, right? He was literally predicting the digital romance era decades before it happened. But it wasn't just the concept that blew people away, it was the execution. That talkbox turned into an instrument of intimacy. Roger's voice, run through those wires and tubes, somehow sounded more human than most singers on the radio. He could make it whisper, he could make it moan, he could make it sound like a robot falling in love. And then you had Charlie Wilson from the Gap Band and Shirley Murdoch lending their vocals, creating this futuristic duet that still feels fresh today. Computer Love wasn't just a hit, it was a statement. Fans couldn't get enough. The song shot up the R&B charts, and clubs from New York to LA were vibing to it. And here's the thing, it wasn't just a slow jam, it was a cultural moment. People still talk about where they were the first time they heard that beat drop, that talkbox sing, that hook that sounded like it came straight from the future. But Roger wasn't done. Right after Computer Love, he came back with I Want to Be Your Man in 1987. Man, that song was pure magic. Unlike Computer Love, which leaned into futuristic romance, this one was personal, emotional, and stripped down. Roger put the talkbox aside and let his natural voice take center stage. And wow, his vocals were tender, aching, soulful. You could feel every ounce of vulnerability in that track. It became his biggest solo hit, climbing the Billboard Hot 100 and crossing over into mainstream audiences who maybe didn't know him from Zapp. Couples played it at weddings, kids dedicated it to their crushes on the radio. It became the love song of the late 1980. And here's the kicker. Roger was doing all this while still producing and performing with Zapp. He had one foot in the band, one foot in his solo career, and both were thriving. That's rare, man. Most artists struggle to balance one, but Roger was running two lanes at the same time and winning in both. By this point, he wasn't just making funk. He was shaping R&B, planting seeds in hip-hop, and proving that his sound could touch every corner of the music world. Roger Troutman had officially broken through, and the crazy part? His best-known contribution to the culture was still to come. After the world fell in love with Computer Love and I Wanna Be Your Man, Roger Troutman wasn't just a funk pioneer anymore, he was a crossover star. His music was blasting out of car stereos, roller rinks, house parties, and radio stations across America. But man, what made Roger so special wasn't just the hits, it was the way he pulled people together through sound. See, Roger wasn't afraid to share the spotlight. He pulled in other voices, other talents, and made collaborations feel like family gatherings. Shirley Murdoch, for example, Roger didn't just give her a chance, he produced her breakout record As We Lay, which became a Quiet Storm classic. He saw her gift and gave it wings. Same with Charlie Wilson, who slid onto Computer Love and turned a great track into an all-time masterpiece. That's who Roger was. He knew how to make everybody shine. And then came the 1990. Man, this is where Roger's influence hit a whole new level. Hip-hop was exploding, and producers and rappers were digging through crates, looking for sounds that slapped. And guess what? They kept finding Roger Troutman and Zapp. Tracks like More Bounce to the Ounce and Dance Floor became the backbone of West Coast rap. NWA, Ice Cube, Snoop Dogg, they all sampled Roger's funk. It was like the soundtrack to the streets. But the biggest moment? 1995. Two giants, Dr. Dre and Tupac, pulled Roger in for California Love. And man, when that video dropped, it was a wrap. The desert scenes, the Mad Max vibe, Tupac riding wild, and right there in the middle, Roger Troutman on the talkbox, delivering one of the most iconic hooks in hip-hop history. Think about that. Here's a guy who came up in the funk era of the 1970, who blew up in the 1980 with R&B ballads, and now, in the 1990, he's the voice of a new generation of hip-hop. That's not just longevity, that's reinvention. California Love wasn't just a smash hit, it was a bridge between eras, and Roger was the glue holding it together. And yet, despite all this, Roger still wasn't treated like the legend he was. Prince was getting the headlines. Stevie Wonder was celebrated as a genius. Rick James had his wild reputation. But Roger Troutman, who literally shaped the sound that fed R&B, funk, and hip-hop, wasn't mentioned in the same breath nearly as often. That's crazy, right? The man gave the world futuristic love songs, funk anthems, and one of the most important hip-hop records of all time, and he still carried that underrated tag. But the fans knew, the artists knew, and deep down, Roger probably knew too. He had broken through every wall the industry put in front of him. From Dayton garages to global stages, Roger Troutman had proven he was more than just a musician. He was a visionary who made the future sound like the present. Man, if the breakthrough years showed us the genius of Roger Troutman, the conflict years showed us the weight he had to carry. Because behind all those hits, all that bounce and funk, there were cracks forming cracks that came from money, family, and the brutal reality of the music business. First off, let's talk about the industry. Roger was a creative mastermind, no doubt, but the music industry? It's a shark tank. And for a black artist in the 1980 and 1990, it wasn't built to protect you, it was built to eat you alive. Labels wanted hits, promoters wanted money, and everybody wanted a piece of Roger's genius. He was producing for Zapp, running solo projects, helping artists like Shirley Murdoch, and still being pulled into sessions for hip-hop legends. That's a lot of pressure, man. When you're that talented, everyone's at your door asking for a favor, a beat, a hook, a miracle. And then there was the money. Running a band with your family isn't like running a regular business. The Troutman brothers had love for each other, but love don't pay the bills. Studio equipment, tour buses, payroll, lawsuits, it all added up. Roger had built Troutman Sound Labs in Dayton, a recording studio that became a hub not just for Zapp but for the community. It was a beautiful thing, but it was also expensive to maintain. Some say the finances were messy, and messy money has a way of turning family against family. Roger's brother Larry, in particular, was deep in the business side. He was often the one handling contracts, paperwork, and negotiations. Now, here's the thing, Larry wasn't just a brother. He was also a manager, a gatekeeper. That dual role is dangerous. When family starts mixing with money and contracts, feelings get hurt. Resentment grows, and slowly, the bond that made Zapp so strong began to show strain. At the same time, Roger was feeling the personal toll. The road life wasn't glamorous, it was grueling. Constant touring, late-night shows, endless interviews. The pressure to stay relevant eats at your spirit. And even though Roger was known for keeping clean, no drugs, no wild rock star addictions, he wasn't immune to the stress. Being the creative leader of a whole movement meant the weight of success and failure sat squarely on his shoulders. And here's the wildest part. While he was propping up everyone else, he was still being underrated by the industry. Imagine that. You're out here shaping funk, feeding hip-hop, producing R&B slow jams, but you don't get the mainstream respect of your peers. That has to sting, man. That has to mess with your head. Fans from Dayton remember seeing Roger, even at his height, as this down-to-earth dude who would still hang with people, still show love. But behind the smile, behind the showmanship, there were battles brewing. Some were personal, some were financial, and some were tied to the very people he trusted most, his family. It's heartbreaking when you think about it. Roger built his empire with his brothers, and yet the very thing that made them strong family was becoming the source of his deepest struggles. The stage lights were bright, the music was timeless, but in the shadows tension was building, and nobody could have imagined just how dark that storm would get. By the late 1990s, Roger Troutman was still a force in music, but behind the scenes, the storm was getting darker. The pressure of running Zapp, the strain of finances, and the weight of family ties were closing in. And man, nobody saw how far it would go. His brother Larry was at the center of it. Remember, Larry wasn't just family, he was the one handling business, keeping the books, negotiating deals. That kind of role comes with power, but it also comes with stress. And when money gets tight, when the IRS comes knocking, when lawsuits pile up, that stress doesn't just sit on paper, it eats at people. Rumors swirled around mismanagement. Some said studio costs were draining the family. Others pointed to disagreements over royalties. It wasn't just about numbers, it was about pride, about legacy, about brothers who once jammed together in a garage now staring at each other across a desk. That's the kind of tension that cuts deep. Roger, on his end, was still pushing forward. He was still touring, still in demand, still the face of Zapp. But that success didn't erase the problems at home. If anything, it made them worse. Because when one brother is shining and the other feels the walls closing in, jealousy, frustration, and desperation can creep in. And that's exactly what happened. The 25th of April, 1999, a date that still breaks hearts in Dayton and beyond. Roger Troutman was found shot outside his recording studio. Man, that news hit like a bomb. How could somebody who gave the world so much joy, so much music, go out like this? And then the details started coming in. It was his own brother, Larry, who pulled the trigger. That's crazy, right? It's almost too much to believe. Two brothers who built everything together, music, legacy, a whole movement ended in tragedy. After shooting Roger, Larry took his own life. A murder-suicide that left fans shocked, the community shattered, and the Troutman family devastated. People still don't know exactly why. Some blame the money problems. Some say it was depression. Others say it was years of built-up tension that finally snapped. But the truth? Only Roger and Larry knew what really happened in those final moments. And now, both of them are gone, buried side by side. For the city of Dayton, it was like losing royalty. Fans described being in tears, grown men calling their families, people standing outside the studio in disbelief. Roger wasn't just a musician, he was their hometown hero. And Larry, for all the pain, was still family. The community mourned them both. And man, the comparisons started flying. People said it felt like Marvin Gaye's death all over again, another legend taken by family, another reminder of how fragile greatness can be. The funk world lost a pioneer, hip-hop lost a bridge to its roots, and R&B lost one of its most soulful voices. It's one of the saddest chapters in music history. A story of brothers who turned basements into stages, who gave the world hits that still play today, ending in violence no one can fully understand. The light and the shadow, the joy and the pain. Roger Troutman was just 47 years old, still young, still in his prime, still with so much music left in him. And Larry? A brother, a manager, a man who carried his own demons. In the end, both their lives ended on the same day, leaving behind questions that will never fully be answered. Even though Roger Troutman's life ended far too soon, his sound never died. Man, if anything, his influence grew even stronger after he was gone. That talkbox, his signature instrument, became the blueprint for an entire generation of artists. You hear it and you don't just think, funk, you think Roger. Nobody bent the machine to his will like he did. He made it breathe. He made it cry. He made it immortal. One of the clearest signs of his impact came from hip-hop. In the 1990s, West Coast rap was built on Roger's grooves. More bounce to the ounce and dance floor got sampled so many times, they became part of the DNA of G-Funk. Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Ice Cube, all of them leaned on Roger's sound. That bounce, that rhythm, that spacey funk without Roger, G-Funk doesn't exist the way we know it. Period. And it didn't stop there. T-Pain, for example, has openly said Roger was the reason he picked up the talkbox and experimented with vocal effects. And while people love to credit auto-tune for changing modern R&B, truth is, Roger paved that road decades earlier. He showed the world you could use technology and still keep it soulful. That's wild. Man, because so many singers today are basically following a path Roger laid out long before. You also hear Roger in artists outside of hip-hop and R&B pop, electronic, even modern funk revival bands. They all tip their hats to him. Bruno Mars, Anderson, Pac, and others from the new school. They're standing on Roger's shoulders whether they realize it or not. Every time somebody drops a record with that funky bass line, that electronic vocal glide, that bounce, you're hearing echoes of Dayton, Ohio. You're hearing Roger Troutman. And let's not forget the songs themselves. Computer Love still sounds futuristic, even in the streaming era. I Wanna Be Your Man still gets played at weddings, still makes people tear up when it comes on the radio. California Love? Man, that's an anthem that will never fade. Every time Tupac's verse hits and Roger's talkbox hook slides in, it's like the soundtrack of a whole generation. So yeah, Roger's gone. But his legacy? It's alive in every beat, every melody, every voice effect you hear today. He didn't just make records, he made a language. And the music world is still speaking it. For the city of Dayton, Ohio, Roger Troutman isn't just a legend, he's family. Even years after his passing, people still ride past Troutman Sound Labs on Salem Avenue and feel a chill, like the music is still echoing through those walls. Man, ask anybody from Dayton, and they'll tell you straight up, Roger put the city on the map. His sound gave pride to a community that sometimes got overlooked, and that pride still runs deep today. Fans never stopped showing love. Murals went up, tributes poured in, and every anniversary of his death, you'll see people online still saying, "Rest in peace, Roger." And it's not just nostalgia, it's recognition. Folks know he changed the game, and they're not letting his name fade away. Even the toughest cats, the ones who don't usually show emotion, admitted to crying when they heard he was gone. That's how deep his impact was. Roger's family kept his spirit alive, too. His children and grandchildren have carried the torch in their own ways, some through music, some just by sharing his story. Sadly, tragedy touched them again when his granddaughter, Lexi Alajai, a rising rapper, passed away in 2020. But even in that loss, fans connected it back to Roger's legacy because the Troutman name still represents creativity, resilience, and heart. And here's a big one: the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Man, fans have been calling for years to see Roger and Zapp inducted. Think about it, how many artists can you name that influenced funk, R&B, and hip-hop at the same time? How many can you say literally shaped the sound of a coast, like Roger did with West Coast rap? If that doesn't deserve a Hall of Fame spot, what does? But somehow, the call still hasn't been answered. It's wild. People online are still saying, Roger deserves it. He deserves that recognition. Hells, but maybe that's the essence of his story. Roger Troutman was always underrated in the spotlight, but never in the hearts of the people. His music still plays at cookouts, at block parties, at clubs, at weddings. His voice box still gets imitated, sampled, honored. And his name still sparks conversations about genius, tragedy, and what it means to leave a mark that time can't erase. So yeah, the industry might drag its feet, but the people already made their decision. Roger Troutman is a legend. He's funk royalty, an innovator, and a man whose vision still shapes the music we hear today. And if you ask Dayton, if you ask fans worldwide, they'll tell you, his legacy is forever. Man, when you look back at Roger Troutman's story, it's almost like a movie. A kid from Dayton with nothing but a dream, turning basement jams into global anthems. He wasn't supposed to make it out, but he did. And not only did he make it, he changed music forever. That's wild when you think about it. Roger gave us the bounce, the groove, the funk that had whole blocks dancing. More Bounce to the Ounce wasn't just a track, it was a lifestyle. He gave us the futuristic romance of computer love, predicting a whole era before anybody else even imagined it. He gave us tenderness with I Want to Be Your Man, showing that even a funk god could bear his heart. And then, he cemented himself in hip-hop history with California Love, standing right next to Tupac and Dr. Dre in one of the greatest songs ever recorded. That's a resume most artists would die for. But behind the lights and the fame, there was pain. Roger carried the weight of his family, his band, and his community. He tried to be the leader, the provider, the visionary, but even visionaries are human. And when the storm came in 1999, it took him from us in a way nobody could have imagined. Killed by his own brother, buried side by side, 2 lives gone in one tragic moment. It's a story that still haunts fans to this day. And yet here's the thing, Roger Troutman's death didn't silence him. Because every time you hear a Talkbox line, every time you hear that West Coast bounce, every time a new artist experiments with technology and music, you're hearing Roger. He's in the DNA of modern sound. T-Pain, Bruno Mars, Anderson, Pac, countless rappers and producers, they're all walking through doors Roger opened decades ago. So why, man? Why isn't his name sitting right next to Marvin Gaye, Prince, Stevie Wonder, Rick James? Why doesn't the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame already have a spot with Roger Troutman's name etched in stone? That's the injustice. That's the underrated part of this whole story. He gave the world innovation, he gave the world culture, and yet he still hasn't been fully recognized for the giant he was. But maybe that's where we, the fans, come in. Because legends aren't just crowned by awards, they're crowned by the people who refuse to forget. And if you've ever slow danced to I Want to Be Your Man, if you've ever bounced to More Bounce to the Ounce, If you've ever shouted along to California Love, then you're part of Roger's legacy. Roger Troutman was more than a funk pioneer. He was a visionary, a family man, a performer who poured every ounce of himself into his music. His story is tragic, yes, but it's also inspiring, because he proved you don't need the industry to call you a legend. If the people call you one, then you are. So here's the question for y'all. Do you think Roger Troutman deserves his flowers? Deserves to stand shoulder to shoulder with the greats in the Hall of Fame? Or is his legacy already bigger than any award could ever be? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is a conversation we need to keep alive. Roger Troutman may have left this world at 47, but his voice, mechanical yet soulful, futuristic yet timeless, still sings. His name might not shine in lights the way it should, but in the hearts of music lovers, man, it shines brighter than ever. Rest easy, Roger. The world may have called you underrated, but to us, you'll always be unforgettable.